All right, guys, last little section here with Jackson and Tyler. Not a lot to write here, but the last thing we talked about was the Texas Revolution. The Texans had lost, obviously, at the Alamo and at the Goliad Massacre. But Americans are sort of turning their eye towards Texas and seeing their fight for independence. The last major battle that we talked about, or will talk about, in about the Texas Revolution is, of course, the last one that matters, really, and that's the one where Santa Anna was actually captured. So after the Goliad massacre, and after a lot of Americans are rushing to the aid of the Texans against the Mexicans in their fight for revolution, Sam Houston retreats to where Houston is today in the Battle of San Jacinto. You've got a battle, 1,300 Mexicans versus 900 Texans. This battle takes place on April 26, 1836. And what's really interesting about this battle is Sam Houston has a pretty smart idea about how to defeat this overwhelming force. He decides to attack the Mexicans during the Mexican siesta. Okay, and he ends up wiping out the entire Mexican force. Santa Anna is actually hiding in the tall grass outside the battlefield and is captured. So now we have the dictator of Mexico captured, and now we can kind of sit him down and have some terms for the end of the war. So Santa Anna is sat down. 2 treaties will be signed here. And in the treaty, Santa Anna agrees to withdraw all Mexican troops from Texas. He also agrees to recognize the Rio Grande River as the border between the Republic of Texas and Mexico. Again, the Republic of Texas should be considered a country here. Santa Anna is then released. Okay. And then he reneges on all the promises he just made. He basically says, no, he changed his mind about the 2 treaties that he just signed. He was under duress, so none of it really mattered. Mexico still considered Texas as part of Mexico. So kind of a symbolic win for the Texans, but Mexico still claims Texas. So we have an issue. The fighting is going to die down a little bit. Here is a map of the Republic of Texas. Here, of course, is the Lone Star flag. Okay, so why all this matters? Well, all this matters because the issue in Texas is not solved, and so the federal government, the American federal government, is going to have to do something about it. So Mexico is upset with the United States, but the United States public opinion is sort of in favor of Texas. Andrew Jackson, still the president this time, is in favor of Texas. He likes Texas. He hates the Mexican dictator, of course, Santa Anna. He admires Sam Houston, but he's not real quick to recognize Texas as an independent republic, and there's a reason for that. Why? Well, the big reason is, of course, slavery. If Texas comes into the Union, it will be a slave state eventually, which will sort of tip the balance of scales in Washington. And Andrew Jackson is worried about this. Not really worried because it's a slave state, but because the addition of this new slave state will cause the imbalance. He's a Democrat. Okay? Martin Van Buren is a Democrat. They are pro-slavery. So in this essence, it would be really good for them, but it could be seen as somewhat of a conspiracy, somewhat of another corrupt bargain, if you will, allowing Texas in, which would tip the scales of power towards the Democrats. So Jackson's on his way out. He doesn't want this to be a major issue for Van Buren. So again, the Democrats are pro-slavery in the South and the West. And Van Buren is sort of the hand-picked successor of Jackson. He wants his ideals to kind of stay alive after Jackson's gone. So the day after Martin Van Buren is elected, Andrew Jackson does recognize Texas. It doesn't really do much good because it's not an official thing, but it does sort of get a lot of support from the Democrats. But because it's not official, it's not necessarily going to anger the national Republicans. So Texas wants to unify with the United States. Slavery is meant to keep the United States from accepting this, again, to tip the scales of power. Texas is still afraid of a renewed invasion of Mexico. The war is not necessarily over with. There never really was an armistice. Texas actually sends out feelers to Great Britain and France to try to get some outside help. Again, Texas is operating under the assumption, and the right assumption, that they're actually their own country, and they kind of are. Okay. Interesting fact about this: a lawyer in 1843 tries to sell Great Britain Texas, and Texas could have become part of Great Britain. And again, he does this because this lawyer is a staunch abolitionist. He feels like the best way to get rid of slavery in Texas is to sell Texas to Great Britain. So that almost happened. We almost had this. Okay, we almost had a Tex Britain, if you will. Okay, so moving on, a new party sort of comes around in the next election. We have the Whigs. They're against Andrew Jackson. Whigs are anti-slavery. They take their name from the British, who were against the monarchy way back in the Revolutionary War. And again, the Democrats are for Andrew Jackson. Other famous Whigs, we've got Henry Clay, John Calhoun. They're the ones who were going to form it in 1834. And all of these guys are united in their hatred of Andrew Jackson. The election of 1836, Whigs, how they try to win this election is kind of interesting. There were actually 4 Whigs, and their strategy was to split the vote so that no one got the actual majority in the Electoral College. And if no one gets the majority, then they're going to have to throw the election to the House of Representatives. Whigs did not nominate a single candidate. And again, they tried to split the vote on purpose. It kind of backfired on them. They're going to lose this election, but it's an interesting strategy nonetheless. Leading Whigs in this particular election were William Henry Harrison and Daniel Webster. Let me pause for a second. I think it's a good time to stop the video. We're going to resume right after this. Stay tuned.